For nearly 200 years, the most brilliant geographers and explorers in Europe were convinced of a lie. They believed that California was a mythical island, a terrestrial paradise cut off from the rest of the continent, ruled by a pagan warrior queen named Calafia. According to the popular Spanish romance novels of the time, this island was filled with gold, guarded by griffins, and inhabited solely by women who wielded weapons made of precious metals. It was a fantasy dream of wealth and isolation projected onto a blank spot on the map. They were wrong about the geography, and they were wrong about the griffins, but they were right about one thing: the gold. Today, the reality of California is arguably more impressive than the myth. If this state were its own country, it would boast the 5th largest economy in the world, a cultural and technological superpower that dictates the future of the human race. But the journey from a misunderstood line on a map to the global powerhouse we know today was not a straight line. It was a chaotic, violent, and incredibly fast transformation that happened in the historical blink of an eye. I'm U.S. State History, and we are going to speedrun the 500-year history of the Golden State. To understand California, you have to forget the modern borders for a second and go back to the beginning. Before the flags of Spain, Mexico, or the United States ever flew over this land, California was the most densely populated and culturally diverse region in all of North America, north of Mexico. It wasn't a wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was a bustling network of civilizations. We are talking about over 300,000 people living here, speaking roughly 100 distinct languages. The sheer diversity here was staggering. More distinct languages were spoken in pre-colonial California than in all of Europe combined. This was largely due to the geography. The massive mountain ranges and distinct microclimates allowed different groups to develop completely unique cultures, just miles apart from one another. On the misty coast, you had the Chumash, who were master mariners and engineers. They built advanced plank canoes called tumals that allowed them to navigate the open ocean, trading with the Channel Islands and establishing a maritime economy based on shell beads. Move inland to the valleys, and you find the Maidu, Miwok, and Yoke. These groups didn't rely on the large-scale agriculture of the Aztecs or the nomadic hunting of the Great Plains tribes. Instead, they mastered the art of land management. They used controlled burns to clear underbrush and promote the growth of oak trees, creating a sustainable abundance of acorns, which served as their staple food source. These were complex, largely peaceful societies that had adapted perfectly to their specific environments for thousands of years, living in a delicate balance that was about to be shattered by the arrival of wooden ships on the horizon. To truly understand the history of California, we must first abandon the idea that the story begins with European discovery. Long before Spanish galleons appeared on the horizon, this land was arguably the most densely populated and culturally diverse region in North America, north of Mexico. We are talking about a civilization of over 300,000 people speaking roughly 100 distinct languages, a linguistic diversity so dense that it rivaled the entirety of Europe. This was not a monolithic culture but a complex mosaic of nations adapted perfectly to California's extreme geography. In the north, you had the Yurok and Carrick thriving in the redwood rainforests, building plank houses and centering their economies on the annual salmon runs. Along the central coast, the Chumash engineered the tumal, a sophisticated plank canoe sealed with natural asphaltum that allowed them to hunt deep ocean swordfish and establish trade routes with the Channel Islands. In the vast Central Valley, the Maidu and Yokuts managed the landscape through controlled burning, a technique that cleared underbrush to prevent massive wildfires and promoted the growth of oak trees, which provided the acorns that served as the region's caloric staple. These were not wandering nomads. They were settled, sophisticated societies with complex religious hierarchies, trade networks that stretched to the Colorado River, and a deep understanding of resource management. For thousands of years this delicate balance held, creating a world where hundreds of tribales coexisted in relative peace, separated by mountain ranges and dialects, completely unaware that their isolation was about to be shattered by an empire expanding from the other side of the world. The European chapter of California began not with a bang, but with a centuries-long hesitation. In 1542, Juan Rodriguez Sabrilo, sailing for Spain, became the first European to navigate the California coast. Landing at what is now San Diego Bay, he claimed the land for the Spanish crown, but the expedition was a disaster. Cabrillo died of an infection from a broken limb, and his ships barely survived the winter storms. Spain took one look at the rugged, foggy coastline, decided it was too far away and too difficult to settle, and essentially ignored it for the next 200 years. During this long pause, California existed in the European imagination more as fiction than fact, due to a cartographic error that went uncorrected for over a century. Maps of the era depicted California as a massive island, detached from North America, inhabited by a fictional Amazonian warrior queen named Calefi. It wasn't until the late 1700s that the Spanish crown finally felt the pressure to return, not because they wanted the land, but because they were afraid of losing it. Russian fur traders were slowly creeping down the coast from Alaska, and the British were pushing west, facing geopolitical competition. King Charles III ordered the Sacred Expedition in 1769 to finally colonize the territory. This decision marked the end of California's isolation and the beginning of a permanent European footprint, driven not by the discovery of gold, which lay hidden beneath their feet, but by the fear of Russian otters trappers. The colonization of California was unique because it wasn't led primarily by soldiers, but by priests. The strategy was the mission system, a chain of 21 religious outposts stretching up the coast along a trail known as El Camino Real, or the Royal Road, led by the Franciscan friar Junípero, Serra and military captain Gaspar de Portola. The Spanish aimed to convert the Native American population to Catholicism and transform them into tax-paying Spanish subjects. While the missions are today romanticized for their adobe architecture, serene gardens, and the introduction of European agriculture like vineyards and olive groves, the reality for the indigenous population was apocalyptic. Native people were brought into the mission systems, sometimes voluntarily, often through coercion, where their traditional way of life was systematically dismantled. They were forbidden from leaving, forced to labor in the fields, and stripped of their languages and religious practices. However, the deadliest weapon the Spanish brought was unintentional. Germs. Lacking immunity to European diseases like measles and smallpox, the native population collapsed. It is estimated that during the mission period alone, the indigenous population plummeted by tens of thousands. The missions succeeded in establishing a Spanish foothold and laying the agricultural foundation of the state. But the cost was the near-total destruction of the civilizations that had thrived there for millennia. It remains one of the most controversial and devastating chapters in the state's history, a collision of faith and imperialism that left deep scars on the land. In 1821, the geopolitical map shifted violently as Mexico won its independence from Spain, and California transformed from a Spanish colony into a Mexican territory. The new Mexican government, eager to break the power of the Catholic Church, passed the Secularization Act of 1833, which stripped the missions of their vast landholdings. Instead of returning this land to the Native Americans as originally promised, the government granted millions of acres to politically connected families and retired soldiers. This birthed the Rancho era, a brief but legendary period often romanticized as the golden age of California. The economy shifted entirely to cattle ranching, driven by the global demand for cowhides, which were known as California banknotes, and tallow for making candles. Wealthy California families lived on massive estates, governing themselves in a semi-feudal society defined by hospitality, incredible horsemanship, and grand fiestas. It was a society with a small population and a massive footprint, where a single family might own 100,000 acres. Yet, this pastoral lifestyle was fragile. The central government in Mexico City was distant and weak, often leaving the territory in a state of political chaos with frequent revolts. Meanwhile, the isolation of the ranchos was ending. American trappers, merchants, and settlers began trickling over the Sierra Nevada mountains and arriving by ship, bringing with them distinct American ideals of manifest destiny that clashed sharply with the relaxed aristocratic culture of the Mexican ranch. By the mid-1840s, the tension between the Mexican government and the growing number of American settlers reached a breaking point. The United States, led by President James K. Polk, had its eyes fixed on California as the prize that would complete the nation's expansion to the Pacific. In June 1846, a small group of American settlers in Sonoma, encouraged by the presence of U.S. Army Captain John C. Fremont, decided to take matters into their own hands. In a somewhat disorganized and alcohol-fueled uprising, they surrounded the home of Mexican General Mariano Vallejo, accepted his surrender, and declared California an independent republic. They hastily painted a flag featuring a red star and a crudely drawn grizzly bear, which some observers joked looked more like a pig, and raised the Bear Flag Republic. This independent republic lasted less than a month. Just weeks later, the United States formally declared war on Mexico, and the U.S. Navy raised the American flag over Monterey. The conflict in California was a series of small but sharp skirmishes, ending with the Treaty of Cahuenga in 1847. The war officially concluded in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in which Mexico ceded nearly half its territory, including California, to the United States. The Californios were promised citizenship and property rights, but in the chaos that was about to follow, those promises would largely be broken. History rarely offers coincidences as dramatic as this. On January 24, 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall found flakes of gold in the tail race of a sawmill he was building for John Sutter. 9 days later, Mexico signed the treaty handing California to the U.S., completely unaware that they had just given away one of the wealthiest geologic deposits on Earth. When news of the discovery leaked, it triggered the largest mass migration in American history. The gold rush of 1849 drew people from every continent: China, Australia, Europe, and South America, transforming California from a quiet frontier into a global crossroads. San Francisco exploded from a village of 800 people to a chaotic metropolis of 25,000 in roughly 2 years, a city of canvas tents, mud, gambling halls, and abandoned ships whose crews had deserted for the mines. The influx was so massive and the wealth so undeniable that California bypassed the usual territorial probationary period entirely. In September 1850, just 2 years after the discovery, California was admitted as the 31st state. But the gold rush was more than just economics. It was a social revolution that established the state's get-rich-quick psychology. It also brought darkness. The environment was ravaged by hydraulic mining, and the native population faced a state-sponsored genocide as miners pushed into the mountains. The gold eventually ran out, but the infrastructure, the population, and the sheer energy of the event laid the foundation for the modern state. With the gold gone, California needed a new lifeline to the rest of the world. That lifeline was steel. In the 1860s, a group of 4 Sacramento merchants known as the Big Four, Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crockefine, at the western leg of the Transcontinental Railroad. This was an engineering marvel that required blasting tunnels through the granite of the Sierra Nevada, a task accomplished largely by thousands of Chinese laborers who worked in freezing conditions for low pay and little recognition. When the Golden Spike was driven in 1869, California was finally physically connected to the East Coast, cutting a 6-month journey down to a week. The railroad transformed the state's economy from mining to agriculture, allowing California's produce to reach national markets. However, the Big Four created a monopoly, the Southern Pacific Railroad, which dominated California politics for decades. They owned the docks, the trains, and vast tracts of land, wielding so much power that they were depicted in political cartoons as an octopus strangling the state's economy. This era also saw rising nativism. Despite their crucial role in building the railroad, Chinese immigrants faced violent discrimination and legal exclusion, culminating in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This period defined California as an agricultural giant, but it also established a legacy of corporate monopoly and racial tension that would take generations to unravel. By the turn of the 20th century, the power center of California began to shift south. Los Angeles was a small, dusty town with plenty of sunshine, but one fatal flaw: it had no water. The solution came in the form of William Mulholland, a self-taught engineer who envisioned a massive aqueduct to bring water from the Owens Valley, over 200 miles away, to the parched city. Completed in 1913, the Los Angeles Aqueduct was an engineering triumph that allowed the city to grow into a metropolis, but it completely drained the Owens Valley, destroying its farming community and sparking water wars that included bombings and armed conflict. With water secured, Southern California boomed. Simultaneously, a new industry was looking for a home. Filmmakers, tired of the strict patent laws of Thomas Edison in the East and seeking year-round sunlight for shooting, flocked to a suburb called Hollywood. The combination of cheap land, diverse scenery, and the new aqueduct turned Los Angeles into the entertainment capital of the world. However, this era of aggressive engineering had a tragic cost. In 1928, Mulholland's St. Francis Dam collapsed, killing over 400 people and ending his career. It remains the second worst disaster in California history, a grim reminder of the risks taken to terraform the arid desert into a modern civilization. World War II sparked the second Great Migration to California, arguably more transformative than the gold rush. The federal government poured billions of dollars into the state to build the arsenal of democracy. Massive shipyards in Richmond and aircraft factories in Southern California drew millions of workers from across the country, including a massive influx of African Americans escaping the Jim Crow South. This industrial explosion created a robust middle class and established California as a hub for aerospace and defense technology. When the war ended, the soldiers didn't leave. They bought homes in the sprawling new suburbs, fueled by the GI Bill and a massive freeway system that reshaped the landscape around the automobile. By the 1960s, this prosperity birthed a cultural revolution. California became the epicenter of the counterculture movement. From the free speech movement at UC Berkeley to the Summer of Love in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, the state challenged the social norms of the nation. It was a time of intense polarization, symbolized by the rise of two opposing icons: the hippie movement and the conservative revolution led by Governor Ronald Reagan. By the end of the era, California was no longer just a place people moved to. It was a cultural exporter, defining the music, fashion, and politics of the late 20th century. The final major transformation of California began quietly in the fruit orchards south of San Francisco. In the 1970s, a combination of defense funding, venture capital, and the academic power of Stanford University created a unique environment for innovation. Engineers began perfecting the silicon microchip, and the region formerly known as the Valley of Heart's Delight became Silicon Valley. This wasn't just a new industry, it was the birth of the digital age. Companies like Apple, Google, and later Facebook rewrote the rules of global communication and commerce, turning this small stretch of land into the world's premier economic engine. Today, California stands as a paradox of its own success. It is the fifth largest economy in the world, a leader in green energy, and a sanctuary of cultural diversity where no single ethnic group holds a majority. Yet, it faces existential challenges reminiscent of its past: housing shortages, water crises, and wealth inequality that mirrors the Gilded Age. From the indigenous management of the land to the Spanish missions, the gold rush, and the tech boom, the story of California has always been one of rapid, often violent reinvention. It is a place that lives perpetually in the future, for better or worse, continuing to serve as the laboratory where the American dream is tested, broken, and rebuilt. Looking back at these 5 centuries, the defining characteristic of California is not its gold, its weather, or its technology. It is its relentless speed. No other region on Earth has transitioned from a quiet, indigenous network of nations to a Spanish colonial outpost, a Mexican ranching province, and finally, a global economic superpower in such a breathtakingly short window of time. It is a place born out of myths, literally, named after a fictional island in a romance novel, and it has spent its entire existence trying to live up to that fantasy. It is a land of second chances and reckless ambition, a magnet for those who are unsatisfied with the status quo. Whether it was the 49ers seeking fortune in the riverbeds, the Dust Bowl refugees seeking survival in the fields, or the dreamers seeking fame in Hollywood, California has always been the place where people go to rewrite their own stories. It is imperfect, expensive, and often chaotic, constantly battling fires, earthquakes, and its own growing pains. Yet, it remains the edge of the American experience, the laboratory where the future is invented, tested, and occasionally broken before it is exported to the rest of the world. If you enjoyed this race through history, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep these documentaries coming. And let me know in the comments, which era of California's past do you think had the biggest impact on the world we live in today? The gold rush or the tech boom? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.